we know short tracks, traditionally people talk about short track Saturday night. Assuming this event is in LA 2025 or another location, a short track or maybe even a street course bin for the Clash, should it be held Saturday night considering you have rain? You can't just bank on running it on Monday.
Yeah, I suppose it's an option. I guess the Budweiser Shootout back when that was the name of the Clash was a Saturday night race. Then you line them up for the Daytona 500 with qualifying on Sunday, so it wouldn't be unprecedented to run this race on a Saturday night. But I think obviously the bigger question is where is this race going to be? If it's going to be back in Los Angeles, I know this was kind of a once in a blue moon sort of storm that perfectly aligned with NASCAR weekend. I guess that's the old idiom, right? If you need to end a drought, bring a NASCAR Cup Series race to your city. And like we got the record flooding in Chicago last year, and still fortunately managed to get that race in, even though the Xfinity race was called short of halfway, which was another unprecedented move on NASCAR's part due to the weather. So that's obviously a variable that's outside of their control. Although I will say it did start raining as soon as the Mexico Series race wrapped up last night, so count another one in the scoreboard for the Vortex theory if any Darrell Waltrip fans are watching this. But there's a lot of questions obviously for the future of this event. I think you'd want to obviously pick your location first and then decide based on the location whether or not it makes more sense to run it during the daytime or nighttime. If it's going to be a nighttime race, I would venture to say probably Saturday night would be better. Sunday night would probably be better for the ratings, but Saturday would give you that buffer to come back and run it Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening should you run into the issue of weather, which NASCAR so frequently seems to do.
Yeah, it seems NASCAR weather, as you said, if you have a drought, call NASCAR, problem solved. I agree with you. I feel like this event, especially Saturday night short track, it just seems to make sense. I know the TV race may not be that great, but I think especially when NASCAR, we're going back to Chicago, that is a street course. Yes, you could run what weather, but if you have something like a Chicago again, that heavy rain, I mean, we even see now because of the safety, the challenges of wet tires, Formula One Spa that got called off when they just could not run. It was just too wet. Chicago, it was too wet. So I do wonder if street courses, NASCARs are not exactly made for racing under the rain. If maybe the street courses should be a Saturday, so that way, if you needed a Sunday, you could race. Because we know in Chicago they had to open those roads for Monday, the rush hour traffic. But that would just make it really interesting. You have one day Xfinity, then the Cup Series, assuming you have weather playing out for you. Now, one thing, Ben, Jeff Gluck from The Athletic, he's mentioned that this event may move next year. One rumor I find very fascinating, Mexico City, Estadio Azteca, home of two soccer teams in Mexico. Similar field size compared to Los Angeles. Then we have El Dorado, which is in the state of Chihuahua. It's another rumor, a short track there. One on the pre-race show, Jackson Todd, who made his debut, and Joshua Burst shared their thoughts about the Busch Light Clash. One of them being the Busch Light Clash, maybe swap positions with the All-Star race, where the All-Star race travels around. What are your thoughts of the Clash, and should it move or remain in Los Angeles?
Well, the All-Star race, I feel like never should have left Charlotte. Especially if it's going to be the weekend before the Coca-Cola 600, it just makes sense to keep it in the vast majority of a team's backyard and run it one week and then have the 600 the next. So I would say if you're going to bring the All-Star race into this, maybe bring the Clash to North Wilkesboro and maybe make that kind of a throwback weekend and move the All-Star race back to Charlotte. I'd have no problem with that. I'm not necessarily a fan of these traveling races, even for the finale. I know that gets brought up every time we go back to Phoenix. If we're going to do this playoff format, maybe we should have a rotation of a championship venue. I think Homestead was the perfect venue for that. I'm not really sure why we decided to leave that for Phoenix. I think the quality of the racing has been much better at Homestead than it has at Phoenix over the last several years. But talking about the Clash here for just a second, again, I think there's that old saying, you never really know what you've got till it's gone. And I understand, and I think Chrome Diesel, actually, if we can pull that comment back up, he came in and said something about, there we go. As much as I want Daytona back for Speed Weeks, I don't want a repeat of those two races. And I've been on record. I said on the air that I think the 2019 Clash in my lifetime is a bottom 3 NASCAR race of all time. 2020, I think I could probably put in that category as well. I think I've just tried to wipe that one from my memory. I'm kind of regretting not buying that Eric Jones diecast. I still can't believe that was what the winning car looked like. I think Austin Dillon was the only undamaged car in that race, and even he kind of did a 360 to avoid one of the wrecks. So that was just a absolute farce of a race, as was 2019, to be quite honest. It was nothing but a single file train. But I feel like, you go back and watch, I mean, the Bud Shootout from 2012 when Kyle Busch, had those 2 incredible saves and then bump drafted with Tony Stewart and pulled out right at the end and to win it of a line. I think that was probably the last great Clash / shootout / sprint unlimited, whatever, pick whatever name you like. I don't know if the tracks have necessarily been the issue. I think a lot of times the rules packages that we've brought have led to some not so great races. I think that has kind of turned some fans off to the All-Star race at Charlotte, to the Clash at Daytona, or a shootout, whatever, at Daytona. And we've said, maybe the answer is trying to move it around a little bit. Now, it's not to take away from any of the success that the LA Memorial Coliseum has had, because I think this has had a good 3-year run. But at the same time, you look at this and say, maybe it started to run its course. Maybe you could say that, it's brought in some new fans, but it hasn't caused this Formula One boom in the United States that they've been experiencing over the last several years. Maybe ratings are up in the LA market a little bit, but I don't know that you can make the case necessarily that it's brought in these legions of brand new fans that have stuck around each of the last 3 years. So, if we're going to talk about, the one thing I will say is this: if you're going to do a traveling race of any kind, you can maybe do like a stadium series and bring this to a new stadium every year, so that you give each city an opportunity to experience this, but you only get one chance. If you want to make it, you got to go that one year that they bring it, because we're going to take it to all these different stadiums all around the country from year to year. I think that's an interesting concept. But the traditionalist in me, it misses the All-Star race at Charlotte, and it does miss the Clash at Daytona. So I don't think it would be a guarantee necessarily that you would get a repeat of those 2 years. But, I suppose that's always a risk that you run. But I would, again, like to see, let's go back to the basics. Let's go back to what worked for several decades. You win a pole, you're in the Clash to open the season at the Daytona International Speedway. And if you win a race, you're in the All-Star race at, again, I would say ideally Charlotte Motor Speedway, and we'll go from there. But that would be my decision that I would make if I was in charge. Obviously, I'm not, as much as I would like to be sometimes with the decisions that get made in this sport. But I think there are merits to both sides of the argument here. But again, just for a whole variety of reasons, and you've got the Olympics coming into Los Angeles in 2028 here in the not too distant future. I think maybe the LA experiment might have run its course, but then again, I'm sure there are some locals that have gone all 3 years that love the event that would love to see it stay. So we'll see what they decide to do.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point about the format and how the Busch Clash, the Budweiser Shootout used to be just pole sitters, and then they expanded to include, I think it was 1 year, Ford makes then the Toyotas, Dodge, Chevy, they all had like 4 drivers or stuff, and then they expanded to where we had more and more, and I feel like it just became a drawn out event compared to, it was a short dash of maybe 11 or 12 back in the 90s.
Yeah. Well, Joe, I remember that, because I remember, being a kind of a legacy AJ Allmendinger fan. I remember when he moved to Richard Petty Motorsports and was in that 44 car, and being in the Budweiser Shootout, I was like, I thought this was just for pole sitters. Why is this field so big? And it was because Dodge had basically gotten to the point where it was basically just Richard Petty Motorsports and Penske Racing at the time, and RPM even left Dodge after that to go to Ford in 2010. So Allmendinger, running this car that was only at the time scheduled to run 8 or 9 races that season, basically got into the shootout by default because there weren't enough Dodges to fill out the field. So again, I think formatting wise, it just makes most sense to take, if it's the fastest race, and again, back in the day, the Clash only used to be this 20-lap sprint. It makes sense to have the fastest drivers, or all the pole sitters, in other words, in that race. That would be my decision that I would make in terms of the format.
And I think that there is that missing key, like something for the pole sitter only. I think that what made the Clash work originally, and it was part of it was during the daytime, because you still had other series racing where there was a NASCAR Dash Series, ARCA, other events going on, sometimes IROC. it was part of a day where I think now it became, oh, it's a made for TV deal, but then the ratings weren't high, and then the fan attendance didn't seem to be there. So I think it's something where I would like to see something like that. I do like the idea of the Clash, something stadium wise to get to new markets. I think that's just a creative move by NASCAR to try to get new fans by bringing the racing to them.